Hi, friends. How you been? I've missed you since our call last week.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm good. I'm good. How's everyone doing today?
Great.
Really well. It's really and thank you so much for having us. It's a real honor to be here and to be able to share a little bit of the insights that what we've been doing here at CLS. It's really great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we jump in, friends, I read a little bit about your bios. Do you want to give us a little, behind the curtain sneak peek as to who you are, maybe a little bit about your journeys before we jump in? Michelle, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. Thanks, Hunter, and echo Ollie's sentiments. We're very grateful to be here and excited. So yeah, as Hunter mentioned, I'm an operational change manager at CLS, co-lead and co-founder of our Pride Network. Prior to joining CLS and moving to the greater New York area, I was living in Ohio, working at a global wealth management firm. So as a change manager and an ERG co-lead, I get the opportunity to analyze barriers and navigate resistance to change in order to affect meaningful progress in the organization and my community. So that's really exciting. But kind of into the other more personal parts. So despite being out as a queer person for almost 14 years, I haven't brought my full self to work until I joined CLS in 2020. The thing is, I am very proud of who I am and my identities that I hold. I see myself as deeply creative, empathetic, and capable, but I also happen to be queer. And I'm privileged to now live in a part of the United States where I feel comfortable leaning entirely into my own authenticity. Shedding shame has been very impactful for me. It's created this space and confidence in me to ask for allyship when I need it, to be an ally, admit when I'm wrong, probably most importantly, and make sure everyone feels included in DEI initiatives, regardless of their background. So to kind of wrap up my intro here and hand over to Ollie, I do want to acknowledge my identities as a white cisgender queer woman. I do experience privilege as a white cisgender person. However, I experience marginalization as a queer woman. A fundamental aspect of DEI in my perspective is intersectionality. So therefore, if I reference issues relating to race, gender, or sexuality, I want to acknowledge that I do not speak on behalf of the entire queer community or Black, Indigenous people of color. But I do think it's important to acknowledge that a lot of our progress in the LGBTQ plus community and society broadly can be credited to powerful work from Black queer women and queer folks who are many times underrepresented in our community. So I'm really looking forward to the dialogue here, and I think that I'm happy to pass it on over to Ollie if that works.
Absolutely. So well said. Thank you, Michelle, for setting a tone and letting us into a bit of your story. Ollie, my friend.
It's great when you have a person that works in technology that is as eloquent as Michelle is. So so thanks so much for that, Michelle. So I joined CLS probably about 10 years ago and was probably at the time, I think just to give a bit of context, CLS is a relatively young company. We've only really been around for about 20 years. So when I joined, it was, it wasn't even a teenager yet because I have been at the organization for now over 10 years. So it was a young fledgling organization. And I think if I remember correctly, I was probably the first openly out queer person in the organization when I joined because we were relatively small at that time. And it's been amazing to see the progress of the organization over the last decade and the way that it's embraced diversity and inclusion just generally across all facets. I think for me, it's been one of the rare opportunities, having previously worked in other areas of financial services, particularly in investment banking, where to echo Michelle, it's been one of the places where I feel I've been able to bring my full self to work from day one. And I think I made a really conscious decision when I joined CLS that I was going to bring my full self from day one. And that's been really embraced across the organization. And I think sometimes we underestimate this, but also by our leadership team and the amount that they respect and want to empower inclusivity and diversity across all facets. So it's been a great journey at the organization, seeing it develop and grow into what it has become today. We're probably headcount wise double what we were when I joined 10 years ago. We have far greater representation across all facets of diversity, but we also have a growing Pride network, which is something that we've been extremely proud of. So along with Michelle and with Christian, our other co-lead, we've kind of been the ones that have sort of set the stake in the ground in terms of driving forward our Pride network, and it's been a fantastic journey so far.
Awesome. Okay, love that. Thank you so much for that. So our topic today, financial services can be more inclusive than you think. And so let's talk about what, maybe the perception about financial services. It's largely seen as a field and historically has been dominated by cisgender white men. So how have you seen this change throughout your careers? Where do you see it going? And I'd love to hear about what steps has CLS taken to prioritize a diverse workforce?
Yeah. Do you want me to start out, Ollie?
Yeah, let's kick it off, Michelle. We'll ping pong, but feel free, it's the three of us. Okay. We'll chime in, I'll pitch it to you, but also feel free to add on to each other.
Okay, cool. Yeah, perfect. So I actually love this question, despite the fact that it's like, right, the kind of like initial reaction, because we really get the opportunity to lean in toward each other and consider what DEI is and what DEI is not. So the reality is, and we can't lie about it or change the current fact that the financial industry is still dominated by cisgender white men. So when we talk about DEI, I think many white men feel like they're losing something, or that they're being left out of the conversation. But the reality is that over 40% of white men agree that DEI is extremely important. However, over 70% of white men feel excluded from that narrative. So this is where I think that we need to change perceptions and acknowledge that everyone wants to feel a sense of belonging and to feel included. It's very human of us. So to level set, a lot of DEI defensiveness, in my perspective, I think is kind of anchored in like a zero-sum mentality, that white men aren't being treated fairly and that they're getting fewer opportunities because women and people of color are getting more. It's a presumption that the landscape has been fair all along, and it has not. However, white men have been getting a larger portion of available opportunities for a longer point of time, which of course has less other people with a smaller portion. So I think maybe a way to shift the perspective a bit on its head is when we look at the fact that by reallocating resources to folks so they can get an equal share, you may feel as though you're losing something, but in reality, you're still getting your fair share. So maybe to kind of like bring white men in, we need white men to be involved in DEI, and there are so many important opportunities to engage them. And if we want people to lean in, I say this with bold, italicized, and underlined, we cannot paralyze people with fear and shame. And kind of like moving into CLS, and I'm wrapping up here, Ollie. I am heartened to see folks from all over CLS leaning into asking the tough questions, getting involved in group dialogues, listening to folks who are sharing their stories and experiences, and stepping up as allies. I believe everybody can win if we step away from a scarcity mindset. And in fact, white men can be powerful allies, advocates, and mentors, sponsors for diverse talent, especially when they're able to acknowledge their privilege and lend their privilege, which I think is critical, that we don't exclude white men because of that. And of course, that they don't exclude themselves. I've seen a huge increase in engagement and consideration of DEI efforts at CLS. In fact, I'm humbled to see many folks from my team and the CLS broader organization so interested in this event today. That spoke volumes to me, most of which aren't a part of the LGBTQ+ community. Sometimes we think that allyship is this like complex and elusive concept, but in reality, showing up for people, listening when they share their experiences, and having real conversations are some of the most powerful forms of camaraderie in my perspective. CLS isn't perfect. I'm not going to say that it is, no organization is, because DEI is not a destination. However, when I think of the most supportive folks in our organization, I do think of folks like Ollie, who hold a very senior role, our CEO, Mark, our COO, John, our CRO, Deb, and the head of change management, Sally Pearson. That speaks for itself when you just hear those titles and levels of seniority. So I'd love to hear from you, Ollie. I know that you hold a senior position in the organization. I think that you've been here a bit longer. So I'm going to toss it over to you. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, and I'll probably put a little bit of an organizational lens. I think that's a really great context which you provided, Michelle. I think specifically for CLS, I just think it's been a really interesting. It's such an interesting organization. I think one of the things that has driven, helped to drive a lot of our diversity agenda and support us in this journey has been that the organization itself has a very different mantra about what it's trying to do versus a lot of other financial services companies. Most big companies, any big large corporation you work for, generally is all about generating shareholder wealth. Yeah, it's about making profits. It's about making a return. Our organization and its very kind of strategy is not about that. It's about creating stability and safety for the market. So that by default allows you to attract a far broader group of individuals and a far more diverse group of individuals to the organization. And it's so much easier to kind of carry that story when you are talking about a purpose-driven organization that wants to do something right, where people can wake up in the morning and feel that they're actually contributing something really positive to the broader, market or, the environment in which they operate. So I think that's been one of the great things that's helped us to drive that diversity agenda. And I think also generally as an organization, CLS is, we're across, we operate across multiple locations and with loads, and we need that different perspective of different individuals to be able to contribute towards organizational success. So, I mean, to echo Michelle's points, I think it's, creating that really safe space where people can actually have those conversations and actually, I think one of the things I love about CLS is that there is a willingness to learn and understand, and that helps to break down those barriers. So much of what drives fear is ignorance. And as soon as you start to break down that ignorance, you start to create those relationships across the organization. And then you have senior leaders that are also, holding the mantle, so to speak, to kind of drive that change. That creates a really positive, inclusive atmosphere for everybody to be able to just be themselves and be able to create those relationships and be able to break down those barriers. So I think that's some of the really positive things I see within the organization. And to Michelle's point, it's reflected all the way up the hierarchy. It's not just at certain levels, which is a great thing to see.
I love that. There's so much in what both of you just shared. I love to circle back to you, Michelle, earlier in your introduction to yourself, you talked about shutting shame out, right? And how I can see how by doing that for yourself, then you're able to, come to the table to other people, once we take care of ourselves, putting the oxygen mask onto ourselves, we can help somebody else, right? Mm-hmm. And so I love what you said about we don't want to paralyze people with fear and shame. And, believe it or not, just 2 chats ago before y'all, we had someone dialing in from the jungle because he is a queer, like David Attenborough inspired person, like doing nature documentaries, right? And at the end, someone was like, how do you stay safe? He's like, well, the most dangerous thing you can do is panic. And I was like, and we were talking about wild animals, but I was like, wow.
We're in the wild, don't lie.
Exactly. Right? It's the same. It's the same. This universal thing is like the worst thing we can do is panic or put fear on someone, right? Because then it goes into this like fight or flight instinct. They can feel like something is being taken away from them, like you touched on, Michelle. Yeah. It's actually, as Ollie was saying, like people do have this, when you come to the table, people have this willingness to learn, to understand, they want to grow, and they want to be a part of it, right? Like we want, as humans, I think, I want to be included. I want to be invited to all the parties. I'm not going to go to all of them, but I love an invitation, So I think it's great to hear about like this full, like the litmus of like how to bring people in. I love that you're doing that over at CLS.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I always said, and I know we'll probably end up talking a bit more about our network, but one of the things that Michelle and I have discussed on various occasions is that if you are able to celebrate the diversity of the organization, the individuals that you have, and what they as people and as groups can bring to the table, you go so far in being able to actually then foster those relationships and develop understanding, awareness, and relationships and allyship. And if you start from that really positive mantra and that positive approach to saying, look, this is great. We've got all these people that are different from different places and they bring so much to the organization. We all automatically start to change the mindset that it's not around teaching or mandating or I personally don't like the term educating because it makes people feel like they are uneducated or stupid, which is not what we want people to be, to feel like when they're on this journey with us. We want them to be kind of part of the journey with us. So I think that's something that I feel is always really important when we talk about these topics. Is like it's such a joyous thing that we can have so many different people from so many different parts of life, from so many, you know, and it's not just about being gay or a woman or a question of race, but, you know, nationality, education, backgrounds, that is the wealth and the fabric that kind of can bring people together in such a great way.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of times, like, even just talking about those kind of like intersections of identity, Ollie, is so important because the reality is, like, we are more than just, and that's kind of what I was getting at, we're more than just like one thing. And a lot of times, like, people struggle with their identities, whether or not you're a parent or a caregiver. We just, all of us hold some sort of story. So I think when people think that they're excluded from this, the reality is, like, we all have our angles and our stories and we need each other's support. So it's not just like individual groups of people. So I think if we can get away from that, like me versus you, or like queer people are new, or Black people are new, or like parents and caregivers are new, like we take the shame out of this. And not anything, there's no shame in any of those identities. But I think a lot of times, like, this silence breeds shame because we feel like we're othered, right?
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love too what you're both saying, you know, that speaking to Ollie, when you're like, oh, you don't like the word education because it's like implying someone to them might be interpreted that, oh, I'm dumb, I don't understand this, and that words have psychological impact, right? And that's like part of the journey that we're bringing them onto. And just to like go back to what Michelle was saying, which is like a take me to church moment, is DEI is not a destination. I was like, yes, Michelle. Oh my God, so gosh, so good. Okay, so let's get into you know, talk to me about how CLS you know, works to sponsor LGBTQIA+ inclusivity, you know, across all levels of the organization. We heard a bit about, you know, it goes all the way up, you know, Ollie, you're in a senior position, but tell me how does it look in the map of CLS? Michelle or Ollie, I'll just let you pick who wants to jump in here.
I don't mind.
Yeah,
go for it, Ollie.
I guess I can start maybe I'll kick off, and then Michelle, you can tag team on me. I can maybe give a little bit of context of how we started with this. I think, you know, for instance, when we started the Pride Network, I never felt that CLS had a real problem to solve, but we had a reason to celebrate, and we had an opportunity to celebrate and bring people together around the journey of the broader queer representation that we had in the organization. And actually, all of our affinity groups have kind of developed the same way. They've never been mandated by leadership. They've always been driven from the ground up. It's been a groundswell. And so we have now several, and Pride is one of those affinity groups, so to speak, that is really actually, it's people do it on the side of the desk. They do it because they're genuinely passionate about what they can contribute to the organization. And we make sure that I think, and we've been very successful in making sure that leadership is very cognizant of what we're trying to do and helps to really support and kind of provide that sponsorship over and above to kind of drive our message forward. I think that's been one of the things that I've really liked, is it's not been necessarily something that's been mandated, that, you know, there's a you know, I worked in engagement for a very long time, so this is not me saying anything negative, but it's not HR sitting in a corner saying you must have these affinity groups. This has been something that's come from the organization, and I think that's really representative of who we are as a company, that we go, actually, there's a great opportunity for us to do something here. Let's get together and let's drive that forward. I hope that provides you a good introduction, Michelle, that maybe you can tag team off on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm also like noticing some of the questions in here. Hunter, I might just like look to you for how we want to prioritize content.
Yeah, sure. I'll pepper them in for us. So thank you for flagging that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't have a whole lot to add beyond what Ollie has said, but I think that it's been really interesting to kind of get to know the organization, especially over the impacts of the pandemic. And we do have a lot of folks that have been here for a long time, which I think speaks literal and figurative volumes, because the reality is there's a ton of turnover in the market right now, right? So most of the people on my team are cis women, but women experience a lot of like over and kind of like covert discrimination in finance and in work in general, but they've all been here for a really long time, and I think that kind of speaks volumes. So I don't know if we have necessarily like a specific problem to solve, but the reality is that we are more than what we just experience at work or our environment. In the aggregate of our human experience, there are a lot of issues. And I think that CLS does a really great job of kind of like fostering this spectrum of accessibility and DEI, starting with continuing despite what market trends are, with allowing us to work hybrid. And Ollie, I feel like I'm taking your punchline here, but you have to come in 5 days a month. But the really great thing about that, though, is like, who does that serve? That serves people that maybe are neurodiverse, right? That serves parents, caregivers, that serves people like human beings that are trying to, like maybe eat healthier or manage their mental health or wellness. For me, I have a heavy workload, which I love, but it helps me to manage it better. And then the other thing that you see is a lot of legislation going on right now that the legislation I'm going to use R because there are so many right now, right? Like attacking trans, queer, non-binary folks in our community. And I think that it's really difficult to separate those things when you walk into work. So I think that it's been interesting to kind of like provide education opportunities for people who aren't directly impacted. And I know I'm using the word education, but maybe just to keep the convo going here, and provide a space for people to see like, hey, I'm in a high performing environment, and it's really cool, but there are also queer people here. There's a Black employee network, there's a women's forum, and it gives people the opportunity to kind of have like comrades and realize that like there are spaces to chat through really difficult conversations. And my kind of final point here is that I think that our ERGs serve as a liaison between the employee and the HR kind of like policy change makers in the organization. And I don't mean public policy, I mean like the people that are making the decisions about like our healthcare, things like that. So we've had a lot of really great conversations with individuals that I think is really changing the landscape, and I'm really proud of that work.
That's really fantastic. And would you believe it or not, we only have 5 minutes left. So I want to hear a little bit more about the Pride Network. I have a few questions about that. And there's an audience question that I'd like to touch on. We can end on there, that second one.
Sure.
So tell me, maybe Ollie, if you want to talk to me a little bit about like what Pride Network does all year long, so that Pride isn't just 1 month. And maybe you can talk a little bit about how, things that you're really proud of that have been accomplished with the network, how allies play in. I'll give you a little hodgepodge of things to pick and choose from in these final minutes.
Thanks. I think one of the things I'd pretty like to start with, and I just think that's really representative of the organization, is the level of engagement that we have outside of the direct Pride Network itself. And so one of the things I'm really proud of is like and this is much more credit because I'm a sponsor, so it's much more credit to Michelle actually and the work that she does with Christian, our other lead, in terms of driving that forward. But one of the events we did last year, which was a great sort of kind of education session, so to speak, given that we have about 550 permanent employees, I think the total count of the people that joined that call was about 220. So that's over 50% of your organization is voluntarily choosing to join a session around queer rights and queer activism in a financial services organization. I mean, I remember working in a massive investment bank that had 15,000 people in it, and if we managed to get 200 people to our Pride drinks event, that was an incredible achievement. Do you know what I mean? So I think just to put it into perspective, the level of engagement that we have across the organization is something that I'm personally really proud of. I think it's, again, because we drive that message around celebration, and with that message of celebration, we find ways to like bring everybody in and help people understand our community a little bit better, and understand also some of the challenges that our community is facing and how we can work together to kind of address those challenges. But it's always done with really, really positive intent. And I think that's been one of the things that I've been really proud of in terms of how this team has kind of worked together to mobilize. In terms of the activities, to your point, we do try and break it up across the year. Pride Month is always a big month, and there's always stuff going on, and we generally have an event, and we have drink sessions in the offices, and we do a lot of face-to-face engagement. But we also look at things like IDAHOT, for instance, which we did the whole Wear It Purple this year, which was great, and we had really good levels of people coming into the office, and did some great coverage on that. There's also, with building up our charity activity as well, charitable activity. So we've started to do that more in the US because we have just a bigger cadre of individuals, but we're going to be looking at some stuff in the UK as well. And then there's some work ongoing at the moment also to see what types of associations and things we can join to kind of continue to build that momentum over time. I've rattled through that because I'm conscious we've got 2 minutes. So Michelle, is there anything?
You nailed that, Ollie. And Michelle, because we only just have a minute left, I would love if you would like to impart, any advice. This was a question that came in. Any advice you would give to other financial service companies looking to improve their LGBTQIA+ inclusivity within their organization? Any parting words?
Yeah, sure. I would just remember that it's a top-down approach. And I think I kind of direct this more toward our senior leaders. Remember that this isn't just like us satiating ourselves. This is really something that needs to kind of like be baked into recruiting efforts. There have been a lot of like finance executives that said that there isn't enough Black talent or queer talent. It's like, well, there actually is, but maybe you need to edit your recruiting. So from there, I just wanted to mention that it's also probably good to just like protect yourself. I would say for employees that are engaging in this work, check in with yourself. A lot of times after we conduct our monthly kind of like meetings with our ERG, I'll take like 10 minutes and maybe just journal about things that are coming up for me. And I know that sounds like a little soft, but the reality is that I'm responsible for how I show up in my organization and for my team, and that is a way that I kind of like self-manage. So there's a lot, right? But I'm really proud to be working at CLS. I'm proud to be working with Ollie, and I'm really grateful for this opportunity, and I know Ollie is as well. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. What a power half hour we just did, friends. I'm so grateful to be having these conversations with you. Please come back. I would love to do this again sometime, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Be well.
Take care.